Hello, welcome back. There's a brand new MCU, Marvel Cinematic Universe, film in cinemas right now. Captain America, Brave New World, starring Anthony Mackie. But, is it a Brave New World, or is it the end of the world? Let's find out. Hello, welcome back. My name it would be Paul Mount, it seems. Yes, Captain America, Brave New World. I went to see this yesterday, Saturday, the 15th of February, 2025, with my good friend Scott Holmes. Some of you may remember Scott from the old TV Zone podcast that we used to do a few years ago. We finished about 3 years ago, I think. We did nearly 100 episodes. They are still available online if you want to have a listen to them. They're on Spotify, Castbox, various platforms. They're still there if you want to hear them. They were, of course, inspired by the column in Starburst magazine, which I still write for the moment. This film has been quite polarising. Critics inevitably have been a bit sniffy. Yeah, it's not very good. It's not top tier MCU. I thought this was great. I thought this was a really good Marvel film, and it made me more interested and excited in anything in the MCU since Spider-Man No Way Home. It felt exciting, it felt relevant, it felt quite modern and grounded, and I must admit, for my Marvel entertainment, I like it grounded. I'm not a multiverse boy. I don't care about Loki. I don't care about all these idea of these multiverses and different characters moving around. I just don't care. And I think this is reflected in the fact that the science fiction I tend to like generally is more contemporary earthbound stuff about sort of relatable modern people dealing with the extraordinary and how ordinary folk cope with bizarre occurrences, aliens, whatever. I find that more interesting than multiverses and cosmic verses, alien planets. It's just me. I can watch the stuff, but I particularly connect with contemporary thriller stories that have that edge of the weird. And this does that. And when we're talking about superhero films, so they're slightly out of the realms of being grounded anyway. But the best Marvel films for me have been the Captain America films, the Iron Man films, Ant-Man, Spider-Man, because they are now... They're not out in space. I mean, I like the Guardians of the Galaxy, don't get me wrong. I quite like the early Thor films. There's something to like in a lot of these films. But I think what's been missing, certainly in the last couple of years, when Marvel has wobbled, it has to be said, is a sense of contemporary urgency about it. The fact that there's any relatability, not just to the characters, but into the stories that we're being told. And if you look at some of the stuff we've had, I mean, Deadpool and Wolverine was great fun last year, but nobody could say that that was an important document for our times. It was a multiverse thing, full of violence and swearing. That's what Deadpool does, and that was fine. But you can't really connect with it on any level other than it's entertaining nonsense. Look back at the previous Marvel films that we'd had, because we only had the one last year. We had the Marvels, which, to be honest, is watchable, but it felt like a franchise on its knees, bereft of ideas, working with second-rate characters, not very good stories. Before that, we had Thor, Love and Thunder, which continued to turn Thor into a complete oaf and an imbecile. And you felt that Marvel was clutching at straws with any half-assed character they could get their hands on. Some of the TV shows, She-Hulk. Who needs She-Hulk? Echo was all right, but talk about second-tier characters. She's about 10th tier. Agatha All Along I quite enjoyed recently, but we had things like Moon Knight, which I lost interest in after about 2 or 3 episodes, and Loki, which was all multiverse stuff, and I just don't care. What I'm trying to say here is that I thought Captain America Brave New World was a return to form for Marvel, and I know that the critics have been sniffy about it, and I know that once again the all-important Rotten Tomatoes rankings show 50% or something critics' response, and I think audience responses are up in the 80s. And at the end of the day, that's what matters. I am a critic in that I write reviews and I talk about films and I review them here, but I'm also an audience member, and I think I'm able to compartmentalise those and think, well, the critical part of me and the audience part of me. And of course, you have to put the two together to an extent. But I think the critics wanted to dislike this film or wanted to be dismissive of it. I think most of the critics haven't trashed it and said it's terrible, but a lot of the critics have said it's all right, it's not bad. But it's actually better than not bad. It's actually very, very good. I felt immersed in a grounded story which had a political edge, had a personal edge, because basically, at its core, it's a story about revenge, and it's a story about a man who doesn't believe that he deserves to be the man he's become, and, as the film progresses, learning that actually he does, because it carries on the story from The Falcon and Winter Soldier of Sam Wilson, Anthony Mackie of course, has become Captain America, but he's not comfortable in that skin, that costume. He's not comfortable wielding the shield. And in this film he does. He starts off still not sure that he's the right man for the job. Harrison Ford, who plays President Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross, says to him at one point, "You're not Steve Rogers." And that, you can imagine, to a character like Sam Wilson, must have been like a dagger to the heart. You know, he's struggling anyway, trying to be Captain America, and then he's told quite bluntly by the president, who has had issues with costume superhero characters, that he's not Steve Rogers. You know, you would think, well, sod it then, I'm not going to be Captain America. But he perseveres because he has a job, he has things to do, he has duties and a purpose that he's not quite sure he's ready for. But as the film progresses, he becomes ready for it, without, I think, even realising it. And it seems to me a lot of critics haven't really picked up on that stuff, because they focused on the front of house stuff. They focused on the script and the special effects and the editing. And there are issues with some of those. I mean, this is a film which was troubled in its production. I think there were reshoots. I think there were test screenings that didn't go down very well. So they had to restructure it. And you can see that in places. There are some slightly clumsy editing choices. There are pacing issues. The first 10, 50 minutes, there's some very obvious expositionary dumping. And in places, perhaps the action sequences aren't quite as fluid as they've been in the past. But I think that generally it's pacey and well done. So I think if you know there are problems, you will know there are problems on the screen. But I don't think you should necessarily front load your opinion with that knowledge, because that's a side thing. I think at the end you go into this, and once it settles down, there's a couple of nice action sequences at the beginning, but as I said, there's a lot of exposition and there's lots of links to things in the past, which is an issue I'll come to shortly. But I think once it gets going, whilst it's not the Winter Soldier, because that was a deeply political thing, this has political figures in it. You've got the president, you've got his guards and his associates and his advisors and so on, but it isn't deeply political, because it's about the repercussions of what Thaddeus Ross has done in the past and how that's come to bite him on the bum now he's the president, because there is one particular person who has a huge grudge against him and wants to get his revenge, and he's been working at getting his revenge since the Incredible Hulk film, which was 2009. I think that's possibly one of two main issues, I suppose, with this film, that it appears to be a sequel to The Incredible Hulk, which, as I said, was 20 years ago, near enough. And it also pays service to Eternals from a few years ago. Now, that is interesting because, of course, at the end of Eternals, one of the dreariest films in the Marvel canon, there's this huge celestial body which had half emerged from the Earth and was sticking out of the Indian Ocean. It's not been mentioned or referenced in any Marvel project ever since, despite the fact it's bloody big. But here it is, it's part of the plot here. And the plot machinations here are that this thing has been explored and investigated and appears to be a source of adamantium. Yeah. Which is a new source of energy and power and strength, which could become more important than Wakanda's supplies of vibranium. So all these iniums and aniums. And it's important that the world comes together to exploit this stuff and doesn't battle for the power of it. And Thaddeus Ross is trying to broker an agreement between the nations of the world, particularly Japan, to try and disseminate this. And that's the core of that part of the plot. And it's interesting to see that they are acknowledging that huge, outstanding plot point from the Eternals. Although it isn't resolved in any way that gets rid of it, it does acknowledge that it's there and what it's for. That might be an issue for people who haven't seen Eternals, and it wasn't a massive box office hit. I dare say people have seen it on streaming or on physical media. But there may be people who will be thinking, what? And I think that's an issue generally in the film, because there are lots of back references to events and characters that the audience won't necessarily have seen. There's a main protagonist in the film who goes right back to the Incredible Hulk film, so you need to sort of remember that character. We also have the character of Isaiah Bradley. He's the first super soldier who was imprisoned and experimented on by the US government. You might watch this film and think, who's this bloke? Well, this bloke was in the Falcon and Winter Soldier TV series, and it did seem a bit odd, maybe not odd, a bit curious that a character from a TV series that many of the film audience might not be aware or have seen is fundamental to this film. They do explain who he is, but I think it wouldn't have harmed possibly to have a 90-second flashback to events from the Falcon and Winter Soldier where Sam finds out about this character and who he is and what his background is. He's a fairly major part of the film, and in fact Carl Lumbly's performance as Isaiah is in many ways the emotional core of the film, because he's already been through so much and he's rehabilitated, and Sam, who has a new partner now, a new Falcon, although he's not yet qualified to be the Falcon, Joaquin Torres, played by Danny Ramirez, they've persuaded Isaiah that the past is a different country and that he's now welcomed as a veteran, as welcomed as an American, until something goes horribly wrong when the president, Harrison Ford, is making this huge speech about the power of adamantium versus vibranium, and there's an assassination attempt. And the plot really then centres on who's responsible for this assassination attempt, what have they done to the president, how are they going to find him and stop him and save the president. So it's interesting that the plot hinges on things from previous Marvel films, and I think it's inarguable the film does feel like it's sort of a clean-up operation in a way, tidying up things from previous films that have been hanging in the air for a while. But I think what transcends any concerns you might have about that is that it is done so well. Despite all the problems with the making of the film, it does have a flow to it. It is slightly uneven. The pace is a bit uneven in places. Yes, that's true. But the action sequences are tremendous. There are two of the best action sequences I've seen in a Marvel film for a decade. The incredible aerial battle scene when the US Navy and the Japanese Navy nearly come to missile blows, triggering potentially a world war, and Sam and the new Falcon are trying to deflect these missiles, riding on them, blowing them up. Sam, who of course as Captain America has his own Falcon wings, they're swooping through the sky and dipping and diving and blowing up these missiles, and it's incredible. It's breathtaking scene. It's sort of Top Gun Maverick style aerial photography. It's terrific stuff. And then of course the fight at the end with the Red Hulk, who does appear, of course, played by Harrison Ford. Again, it's a really well done scene because the animation for the Red Hulk is superb, because it's Harrison Ford's, spoiler alert, but I think you probably know, it's Harrison Ford's character who has been transformed into the Red Hulk because of what's been done to him over the years. And they've managed to recapture Harrison Ford's look. It's the Hulk, red, but with Harrison Ford's face, even down to the little dimple mark, make him look like a man monster who is in the image of Harrison Ford. It's really very, very good. There's some other really good fight scenes. There's a really good fight scene midway through the film with Sam and this huge henchman of the character Sidewinder, who's played by Giancarlo Esposito from Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad. And it's one of those fights that makes you wince because there's bones breaking and it looks painful. And again, one of the things I liked about it is the grounded reality of it, because at the end of it all, Sam takes a hell of a beating and his arm is in a sling. He isn't a superhero. He hasn't got the super serum in the way that Steve Rogers did. He can't recover from the blows and jump up and down. He's injured and he's got his arm in a sling. And when Danny's character is injured, he's out of the film for a while. He's in hospital because he's been shot out of the sky and injured. And it makes the characters more human and relatable and believable, because they're not superpower beings. These are people who have access to technology and they can do things, but they are as human as you or I. They're not immortals. They are human and they can be hurt, and that grounds it even more. There are cameos from a couple of characters. I'm not going to spoil them for you, but one of them is quite touching. In fact, they're both quite touching, and they both connect back to previous Marvel projects that I've already referred to. There is a post-credit sequence. A lot of people have said, what a waste of time. No, it's not a waste of time. Have you not understood the film? It's forewarning us and Sam of what's to come. One of the sort of threads that's introduced fairly early on is that Thaddeus Ross wants Sam to reboot the Avengers. Now, we don't really know what's happened to the Avengers post-Infinity War. They seem to have either died or gone their separate ways. He wants to restart the Avengers and bring that team back together because he thinks they need it. Sam doesn't think he's up to the job. By the end of the film, particularly that post-credit sequence, that seems to makes Sam realise we do need the Avengers because it seems that the worst is yet to come. I really enjoyed this film. I got a lot from it. After the first quarter of an hour that sort of rushed about, it sort of flattened itself out and the story was interesting. It was comprehensible. There was no mumbo jumbo about multiverses and timelines and sacred timelines and all this stuff. It was a story about people that you are interested in. I like Anthony Mackie. He's a great natural actor and he brings a real sense of uncertainty about Sam. Sam is still living in the shadow of Steve Rogers. He doesn't know if he's up to it. And he has an arc through the film. And at the end of the film, he's come to terms with his place. He knows he's up to it because he's resolved a situation on his own as Captain America. And I think that makes him realise that he is worth the shield. There's some nice bits of wit too. Anthony Mackie's a naturally funny person. I know because I've met him and he fed me crisps. But that's another story for another day. But he has that natural lightness about him and he brings that to it now and again. It almost seems like improvised dialogue at times, riffing off other characters and what they're saying. So all in all, this is a very good Marvel film. Don't believe all the sniffy critics because they have their own agendas. A lot of the YouTube sniffy critics, of course, are clickbait merchants. The professional film critics, it's not really made for some of the heavier critics because they don't really get this sort of entertainment. And they're going to find fault where others will just find entertainment. And I found this hugely entertaining. It's reignited my interest in Marvel because I must admit, I felt like most people have, that I was suffering from a bit of superhero fatigue, mainly due to a lot of the Marvel TV content, which has been either at best entertaining, at worst unnecessary. And of course, DC has done a lot of damage to the idea of superhero films. I was saying to Scott yesterday, I think the problem with the idea of superhero fatigue is that you get Marvel films, which are generally great, and you have DC films, which aren't very good. And I think that the audience generally probably doesn't know the difference between Marvel and DC. Certainly a lot of people don't. So they see a Spider-Man film, well, that's fantastic. And then it's followed up by The Flash, and they think, well, that's crap. And then they mix the two together because they're not necessarily aware of the two different publishing houses. To them, it's just superhero cinema. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But I think perhaps the poor quality of DC films has affected people's perceptions of Marvel films. But it's certainly post-Endgame and Infinity War, there's no doubt that Marvel's been a bit directionless and a bit sort of, we'll try this, we'll try that. And losing a lot of the big hitters hasn't helped, of course. But I think now that we have Anthony Mackie as a new Captain America, I think this film will do well. I think this will put him up in the A-list of superheroes again, ones that we will want to see more of, and we certainly will because the end caption, Captain America will return. So I really enjoyed this film, and I would say to you, go and see it and see what you think. Don't worry about the critics' reviews. I think you'll have a good time with it. I'm going to rate this a big chunky 8 out of 10 for Captain America, Brave New World. As far as the cinema experience, however, is concerned, this is the first time I've been to a big film in a big cinema. I normally go to local cinemas in the mornings or lunchtime when it's not too busy, even if it's a big film. Yesterday we went to see this at a midday screening at the Odeon in Cardiff. I wouldn't say it was a nightmare, but it was a noisy experience because it seemed that almost the entire audience had brought the contents of their fridges in with them because they were munching and crunching and rustling pretty much the way through the film. Somebody was sniffing all the way through the film. But it was just generally this atmosphere of people getting up and going to the toilet every 5 minutes. Within 5 minutes of the film starting, somebody went out and got a hot dog. And you think, well, can't you just sit there? Can't you sit for 2 hours without going to the toilet? Can't you sit for 2 hours without shoveling food down your face? Apparently not. So it wasn't the best cinema experience I've had in recent times. But the film was good enough to make it worth it. And although these things were a slight distraction, I was gripped enough by the film for it to just be minor irritations. So anyway, that's Captain America Brave New World. I had a good time with it, and I think you will too. Right, thank you for watching. Once again, please like and subscribe to the channel. That would be a marvellous thing to do. Apparently now 69% of you people watching this now aren't subscribed to this channel. It's not good enough. So please press that subscribe button. Stick around because there's loads of film reviews, retro TV, retro films, unboxings, media updates, all that sort of stuff. Lots of Doctor Who if you're a Doctor Who fan. So it would be nice if you would please stick around because I'd like to have you in my life. Right, thank you for watching. I will see you soon. Until I do, keep taking the stuff.